Hey everybody, I'm filming part of this video on location because time is my enemy right now with the holidays and with everything going on at the brewery and everything. So here we are, taking the dog for a walk. I wanted to do a synopsis of last week's meeting for everybody, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page with hop flavors and aromatics, which is the majority of what we covered last week. We also went over training on how to do a spider web chart, or spider chart. It looks like a web. So, and I will go ahead and shoot a short clip of how to do that once I get back to the brewery. So what I want to kind of go over here is there are a lot of flavors attributed to hops, and terroir is important. You will find more predominant or more present flavors and aromatics and hops from different regions. There's a lot of research behind this, so and a lot of resources. You can literally Google and you'll get a pretty breadth of information on that. But kind of the general is the noble hops are from continental Europe. They've got a lot of earthy, herbal, sometimes spicy pepper tones to them, or flavors, aromatics. You have English, Irish hops. Those are kind of the, the Kent Goldings, Fuggles. Those tend to be a bit more floral, herbal. And then the United States has a plethora, a lot around resin, dank, pine. But we also have quite a few that give off citrus and stone fruit. The other thing is Australia, New Zealand. They give a lot of tropical flavors, so that's where you're going to get things like guava, passion fruit, pineapple. And again, these aren't hard, fast rules. There's a lot of research in hops. There's a lot of mixing varietals going on in hop labs and hop farms. So these aren't steadfast, hard, fast rules, but these are good generalizations to help you if you see a beer with a certain kind of hop that can kind of point your palate in the right direction, maybe help you hone in on something that you're maybe more familiar with flavor-wise, like eating a pineapple. So that's important to know. It's also important to remember that hops are a plant, and their contribution to flavor is the aromatics. So you're going to get a lot of sweetness off the malt, maybe some fruity esters from the yeast, but you mix that with the smell of, again, I'm using pineapple a lot, so you mix that with the smell, you mix that with the smell of pineapple, and all of a sudden your brain is tasting pineapple. So it's a really fun experiment to do, is to get a beer that you either has like a single kind of hop that you're familiar with, or is like really, really, really hoppy, and don't even have someone pour it out for you and plug your nose before it even gets to you and drink it and see what it tastes like without using your nose, and see how those aromatics really do affect the flavor. And again, that's just how our brain processes taste. It's our nose is a big factor in our taste. So that's a fun experiment to do, and I do recommend doing it. But also make sure that you are keeping track of how much of that sweetness is the malt or the yeast, or the fruity esters from the yeast. And again, that's a practice skill, and it's not super duper important for our long-term goals, but it is a really good skill to have, especially if you want to take this training to something like judging, or Cicerone certification, or if you're going to start working on food and beer pairings. It's really important to keep in mind what's actually coming from the hops and the malts. And for that factor is because hops can fade. They can fade pretty fast in some beers. So if you're building a menu that's 3 months down the road, but you're building it off the flavors you're getting from the hops, that might not be the best idea. You might, it depends on the age of the beer and how fresh it's going to be when you get it to that table. So some things to keep in mind about hops. We briefly went over yeast as well. Again, yeast isn't a huge factor in our brewery because we use lager yeast, which does have its own characteristic, but the characteristic tends to be more of a mouthfeel, less of a flavor. So we don't get a lot of fruity esters. We don't get a lot of that. It's more clean, crisp, refreshing. So I do recommend trying some beers that have a heavy yeast factor. My recommendations were like hazy IPAs and Hefeweizens. The Hefeweizen yeast strain is very specific. It had banana and clove flavors. And those flavors are coming from the yeast, not from the hops, not from the malt. That banana, that clove is coming from the yeast. So that's a really fun experiment to do. And if you really want to see the difference, you can do like an American wheat ale next to a Hefeweizen and really see how much of that characteristic is coming from the yeast, because an American wheat ale and a Hefeweizen malt bill wise are extremely similar. The yeast is the main differentiating factor there. So I do recommend that. It's a really fun thing to try. And again, yeast isn't as super important for our purposes, but it is important to know as a whole for beer tasting and beer evaluation. Yeah, so I'll do some more footage in the brewery showing the spider charts. I also am going to shoot another short video to kind of prep for today. And if you get a chance to watch it, great. If you don't, I'll go over it again in today's sensory class, because this is Tuesday today, because I'm behind on everything. All right, cheers, guys. Okay, hi again, everybody. So when I was talking about the spider charts, this is the graphic that we used. There are much better, more in-depth ones you can find on the internet. This one's kind of just a really good basic one to get you in the right mindset of how to use this tool. So down here you can see this one is filled out. Basically, there's little lines in here. You're rating how much you taste or perceive that flavor on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 being a whole lot, 1 being not that much. And then it comes up with this nice little graphic at the end, which that helps the brewers and marketing and everyone kind of get a grasp of how those hops are being perceived, because hops, like I said, can fade quickly. Older hops have less flavor, different ways that you're adding hops. So the difference between whole leaf, pellet, CO2 extract, cryo hops, they all have different characteristics when it comes to the aromatics and the flavor. So if we're testing a new hop in a new beer, or maybe we're doing a smash and we want to see how that new hop really does taste and how it's going to contribute to that beer's profile, that's a good, the spider charts are a good tool for that. It's also a great tool for trying to balance different styles of hops. Like I wanted to get the nice pininess of like a Cascade or something, or Simcoe, but I don't want to have it overbalance maybe a fruity characteristic I'm bringing in from like an Australian or New Zealand hop. So using those charts are a great way to kind of help brewers or help production find a good way to balance those hops, because just because you put 1 pound of this and 2 pounds of this or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to be perceived in the end product. So that's really the main goal for using those charts. They also really help you as a panelist or taster annotate how much of the flavors are coming from the hops, how much are coming from yeast, how much are coming from malt, like we were talking about earlier. Because if you are tasting a whole lot of sweetness, but the hop characteristic specifically is all pine, then that sweetness isn't probably from the hop, or at least the hop aromatics. It's probably coming from the malt bills. And then that will help you then delve deeper into like, okay, so where's the sweetness coming from? Is it a syrupy kind of sweet? Is it a bread kind of sweet? Is it a fruity kind of sweet? You know, and then you can better pinpoint those flavors. So that's kind of the end goal of this, is tying all of the different ingredients, being able to parse out the ingredients and then how they tie in together to create the overall profile of the beer. And so really that's kind of the end goal of all these specific sensory classes we're doing, is helping you build those comparisons and build those tracks in your brain, that catalog in your brain, so you can taste a beer, break it apart, and then put it back together to create the whole picture of that ingredient list of that beer. And it sounds super meta, but like that's exactly it. It's just like break it apart so that we can bring it together. And that is what helps us overall change recipes, build a better program, change our malt bills, change our styles, change anything that we have to change on our end to better build the profiles we're looking for in the end product. Okay. I'm going to shoot another short video. I encourage you to watch it before tonight's sensory. If you don't get a chance to, that's okay though. I'll go over everything again. Cheers.